Good evening, TheoTrade. This is Corey Rosenblum, and you're watching the Theo Nightly video for the 24th of February. What an active day it was here in 2022. And headline news. We're going to take tonight's video and look beyond the headline news. And that headline news is Russia and Ukraine and the invasion overnight and the sell-off in the futures market. But that was quickly rebounded. The entire session really opening at that low. The market did crunch to the downside. S&P futures lost over 100 points. But recovered them and more, closing up 1.3%. But the news and the headlines probably are going to focus on the NASDAQ. NASDAQ is our tech-heavy sector, and that also got the push to new lows. That 13,000 level is key in the S and the NASDAQ here, and that pushed up almost, or just about, 1,000 points. So what a difference a day will make. NASDAQ started the session near 1,300, closed at above at about 13,000, closed it at 14,000. Outside of those, we have the Dow, and the Dow was the weakest of the indices today. Despite that, it did close at the highs, but the Russell was up right there with the NASDAQ, up about 2.5%. So that's the headlines. Outside of those, we'll take a look at crude oil, and that was a push to the upside. That was on the invasion news overnight. That's the crude oil contract pushing 100 per barrel. But just like the S&P, which went down to up, the crude oil market, or the futures contract here, went up to down. And gold, similarly, in terms of a risk off or alongside crude oil, gold got a bid up to about 1975. That was the opening print high. From that point, we've seen gold trade down all session. Once again, that was similar to crude oil. And the last thing we'll talk about before we talk about individual stocks is the bond market, seen here with TLT. That started up at the session highs and came back in. ZN is the 10-year Treasury note. That also was a rally up on the risk off. Risk off just means, or risk on just means traders are going into safety of the bond market coming out of the stock market. But risk off type money flow quickly turned to risk on. And in simple terms, risk on money flow means taking money out of the bond market, pushing it into the equity market. We'll see that same logic play out in ZB, which is the 30-year Treasury bond. I promise not to talk about the Ukraine and the headline news, so let's get away from that. Let's go beneath the market, beneath those headlines. And those headlines are playing stocks, individual sectors, and of course crude and some other assets in play, bonds included. But let's take a look at our market cap. Let's use the rest of tonight's video to pinpoint things you may have missed in today's session. And that is the strength in the technology sector. This is what we're looking at in the S&P 100 with the market cap stocks. These are what we affectionately call in TheoTrade the monsters of tech. Those are Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Tesla. Sneaking up into that tech list, we don't count Berkshire Hathaway as a tech stock, but Nvidia and Facebook, they're in the list as well. Nvidia is coming up, Facebook is coming down. Let's pinpoint what that means for the broader picture. And what we'll do is take a look at these stocks. In fact, before we look at the stocks, we'll look at a broader view than just that. In today's close, we see the strength coming in all different sectors except for weakness in financials, consumer staples, and a little bit into materials. So those are the ones to be watching. Energy as well. Within the broader stock market, in the S&P 100, the trend is similar. We have the strength in the technology sector, weakness outside, particularly weakness in the financial sector. That's why the Dow Jones, was relatively weak on today's session. But the NASDAQ, which is a tech-heavy sector, and in fact, monster of tech-heavy sector, was so bullish in the close. And again, that is up 3% at the end of the session. So that's the big picture. And now, let's take a look at some of those charts on the monsters of tech. Apple will start with the largest market cap in the market, and that is Apple. It traded similarly down to the support level. That is a 200-day simple moving average. Just noting price levels on a quick overview of these charts and what we're looking at for the rest of the week into next week. And as we turn the corner away from February into March, not too long from now. But that is a push on the 150 level for Apple shares, and that has pushed it right back inside support. That continues the uptrend on the daily chart and the weekly chart. That's a big picture view for Apple. On to other stocks. Microsoft is the second biggest. It was up 5% in today's session. Microsoft, a 5% gainer after the market sell-off. Again, that was an overnight headline news. We all were ready at any point in time for headline news to hit the market. It didn't hit it last week. It hit it this week. In fact, it hit it late Wednesday night here in the U.S. But overseas, that gave the futures market a sell-off globally. That sent oil up and the others. But in terms of individual stocks, we're looking at the performing names in the technology sector. And again, Microsoft is one of those. So just looking at the key levels on the daily chart here and the hourly chart, which shows just how resilient today's reversal back to the upside or risk on. Very, very quick risk reversal in today's session, which left Microsoft shares up 5%. This is even more dramatic looking at the 1 minute chart. That's the gap down, but taking the gap out of the equation. And that is the performance of Microsoft in today's volatility-filled session. And volatility to the upside in terms of Microsoft and the other stocks that are in play. We'll take a look at Google or Alphabet. It had its range reversal from the top 3,000 down to about 25 or 2680. And the pivot point for Google is right there at 2,500. And that did hit that support level and like a rocket ship launched straight up off 2,500. This is one you'll probably trade specifically with options as opposed to the shares, but the same could be true about Amazon. Speaking of Amazon, there is its key levels and the daily chart. It does not have the same uptrend that other stocks have. It has more of a sideways trend. In fact, we'll take a look at this on a little bit larger perspective to get our refresh the levels that are in play for Amazon. And that's roughly 3,000 as the lower bound of support, 3,500, making that midpoint about 3,300. Again, we would probably trade this exclusively with spreads or any other option contract. We don't want to trade shares here in Amazon necessarily. But that midpoint is 3,200. And at the moment, we're seeing a bounce back or recovery back inside of that horizontal box, volatility box. And we can even push that a little bit forward into today's session. And that has started, or at least has continued, from later in 2020 all the way through 2021. And that box is pushing price lower, but it's coming right back into the 2022. Tesla has been a volatile stock. It still has an uptrend, higher highs, higher lows on the bigger picture, but take that back to the hourly chart and it is showing wild volatility. The high in Tesla is 1,200, and the most recent low, the touchdown low of today's session, was 700 per share. And again, those are key focal points. At the end of the video, it will be helpful to write down these numbers, these levels, and at least make reference to them. And they, in the most part, are simple round number references. And that includes 700 for Tesla shares. And that's pulling it right back into these drop zone levels. That's about 800 for Tesla. And Nvidia, I have a lot of opportunities, a couple of trades, and some lines all over the chart here. But the main idea is Nvidia is downtrending on the daily chart, but did have a reversal buy. And that reversal buy was, in the big picture, at the lower bound of a trend line and into prior support. Now, that was a much bigger bounce than even I anticipated, but nonetheless, that is what the shares transacted and traded back into the middle of this falling trendline channel. The most recent setups being shorting against the high, and that most recent play from the high back to the middle was courtesy of an earnings announcement. And we'll finish with a stock that has fallen well out of favor, and that is Facebook. Facebook used to be $1 trillion in this neighborhood. It is no longer. It is roughly, not to make any fun of a $565 billion company, not at all, but it is showing how far this stock has fallen in terms of price and market cap. That's taken it from $1 trillion And in terms of those that are, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. Tesla was once there as well. But Facebook shares are down, and its pivot point to conclude the video is 200 per share. And that dipped under it, but that did get the recovery. So quickly, Amazon's reference point is roughly 150 per share. Microsoft nearing that 280, even 270. Again, we're making this simple for round numbers. Google at that 2,500. Amazon pushing off the 27, 28, pulling it right back inside. And finally, Tesla off 700. Be careful, be safe. There is plenty of volatility. Option strategies, option spreads, option hedging. That's keeping you safe. Being very directional and very bullish or bearish in volatility can be dangerous, especially without hedges or any type of option strategy. Be careful, safe. This is Corey Rosenblum with tonight's Theo video update for February 24th, 2022.